Good morning. I'll be allowing people in as they start coming into our next session. Good morning, Mr. Trevino. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, Mr. Cortez. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Morning, Ms. Guerrero.
Good morning, Mr. Cortez. How are you doing? Haven't
Good.
seen you in a while.
We'll get
Good morning,
started in about
everyone.
4 minutes.
Words, new meanings, that now we're focusing on, okay, we're going to read this information and we're going to start making predictions. We're going to start making inferences. We're going to start doing these upper level skills that are going to be required, for the rest of your life, basically. And that's where a lot of our students kind of get left behind because they're stuck in that mindset of, okay, I'm still trying to learn to read. And they're not really, they're not really with this whole idea of reading to learn. And so that tends to be the time when most students really struggle with their literacy. And so the question is, what can we as parents do in order to encourage our children, in order to support their development, their growth in literacy around this time? Because anytime after 4th grade, and especially about that 5th through 8th grade range that we're talking about today, that's where they're going to need a lot of support. And that's what we're here to talk about. So let me go ahead and click through here. One of the main things, and actually the main thing that we're going to be talking about today in how to support our children's literacy, all comes down to one word, and that word is engagement. It's all about engaging your child in language when they're at home, and not just talking to them or making them read something that they're not even interested in the first place. But having that meaningful engagement with them at the home. And there's different ways that we can do that as parents. So we're going to be talking about that, but I wanted to read this little section very quickly. In order to engage properly, you need to take part in literacy experiences at home. It can develop your child's reading ability, their comprehension, and their language skills, all things which they're going to need to know, not only for school, not only for middle school, the grades they're going to be in, but also for life. They're going to need to know how to look at a text, look at some document, and be able to make sense of it, understand what is going on. This also is going to improve your children's interest in reading, their attitude towards reading, and their focus. And so what kind of engagement activities can we do? Well, when it comes to reading, there's plenty that we can do. A lot of times, parents seem to think like, oh, I'll give them a book and tell them to go read for 30 minutes or an hour, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if it lacks that meaningful, if it lacks a meaningful experience for them, they're not going to get much out of it. And so what can we as parents do? Well, one of the things that we can do, one of the activities that we can engage in is called joint reading. And basically that just means reading by taking turns. And you can do this with children that are young as well as children that are adolescents, grades 5 through 8. And when you're joint reading, you're basically taking turns reading different sections of a book. Now that may seem like, oh, well, my kid is not going to be interested in that. They're not going to want to participate with that. But this isn't just limited to books. This can be done in a variety of different ways. So if you're a child and you know your child's interest more than anybody, you know how to get them excited or involved in something that they want to be a part of. You know how to motivate them. It doesn't have to be necessarily a book. If they're really into music, if they're really into songs, look up some lyrics of their favorite artist and read them together, look over them. If they're really into art, it doesn't necessarily even have to be words. You can draw pictures and discuss as you're drawing. That's the big part of this, is having meaningful conversations with them. Discuss what you're drawing, discuss the art that you're making, make a story out of it. This can also be with things like game playing and rhyming. I remember when I was a kid and we'd take these long road trips. We'd go long to me back then, right? I was a kid. We'd go to San Antonio for the weekend. On the drive, we're so bored, and we didn't have the luxury of having smartphones back then. We didn't have all of this technology that the kids have now. We had to entertain ourselves. And so what would we do? We'd make up games. We'd go through all the letters of the alphabet and see how many words that we can make up with the letter A, then the letter B. And it sounds really lame, kind of, but to us, it passed the time away. And I think that had a definite impact in developing my vocabulary, even as a young child. We would look at license plates on other cars and try to make words out of the letters and numbers and see what they could stand for and what words they could make. We'd look at billboards and we would act out little skits in the little minivan that we were in. And my mom was a major influence in that. She would be the one that, instead of just, giving us a Game Boy and having us just be quiet for, the 2 or 3 hour drive, she would actually encourage us to engage in these sort of literacy activities. We didn't know they were literacy activities back then. We just thought they were fun little word games. And that's the point. That's how we engage in literacy with our children. We kind of have to trick them into playing a game with them. It's kind of the same thing with younger children as well. And so there's many different types of games that can arise from that. And it just comes down to us as parents being creative about it. How are we going to involve our children? And once again, like I said, this all comes back as well to your child's interests. If they're not interested in what it is that you're engaging them with, then they're not going to be responding to it, and it's not going to help them develop their literacy skills. And so some of the things, like we said, for older children, playing word games, talk about word meanings, point out interesting or new words when reading together. I have this short video I want to show you about some simple word games. Now, these children are not necessarily grades 5 through 8, but you can imagine how this would work for a student that's in that grade range. So let's watch, let me go back here. Word games, here we go.
Hey kids, are you in
course, there's an
elementary
ad.
school like us?
Just
Do
a
you
second.
love science? Well, we love.
All right, so here's an example of some word games, and this is helping children develop vocabulary. And all it is very simple. You find a word that an adult would need to know in everyday life, and you're asking your kids, what do you think this word means? And you kind of get to talk through it. And you can see some of these kids using their context clue skills in this video and thinking, well, that's a root word, so that's my clue to what this meaning is. What do I think this could be? So I'll show the video real quick, and then we can discuss a little bit more.
My favorite word is unicorn. If I have to guess, I think invoice means, is it like an app? An invoice is the way of speaking. Inside voice. When your voice is low volume. I-N-V-I. Nope. When you're running out of petrol and you need to go to get some more petrol. They have a boot. You take away their boot and you give them a new one. Reboot means that your speed level is getting low and then you go to the level of speed you were at. Is it like say if you're just gonna say, I'm going to reboot the server? Opinion. That's my clue. Means like when you stick pins up. It means the pin. It means pins on top. I was about to say you're infected with opinions.
All right, so we're going to stop the video right there just because time. We don't want to spend too much time watching that video, but you can check that out on YouTube. It's called Kids Explain Adult Words. And so it's pretty interesting to get an idea of how these children's minds are at work when they're given a new word, a new vocabulary word that they don't necessarily understand or that they haven't heard before. And so I think it's pretty interesting to see kind of how they kind of think through it. And so the word opinionated, well, one kid caught on real quick. Opinion, okay, that's my clue word. That's the root word, has something to do with opinions. Another kid latched on to the idea of pin, right? So like a safety pin, and now they're thinking that way. And so they're making connections, even if they're not necessarily getting the correct definition the first time, which why would they? It's a brand new word to them. They are starting to make those connections and starting to develop their own sense of meaning. And that's something that's a jumping off point where we as parents can say, okay, well, I see the connections that you're making there. Let me show you how I connect meaning from this word. And we can see these words all the time when we're in the car driving and we see something on a billboard. When you're scrolling through Facebook and looking at the news and reading what people are posting, that's another way we're introduced to new vocabulary. And you can even do the same thing with your kid. Because I guarantee you, they know a lot of slang words that you may not consider proper English, but there is meaning to those words. And you can ask your kids, hey, what does this word mean? Let me take a guess at it. Does it mean this? This is what it sounds like. And they'll be happy to laugh at you, first of all, when you get it wrong, and then explain to you in probably a very sarcastic manner, no, it means this. You wouldn't know. But that's just something that you can do with children of any age. Play word games, talk about word meanings with them. Another huge thing, and this is very important, is asking questions. And we tend to think of, okay, they're going to read something, I'm going to ask them a question afterwards. You don't just have to ask them questions afterwards. You can ask them before they read something. You can ask them during their time of reading. You can ask them after they read it aloud to you. But you can ask very pointed questions. And so I know that time is like running out pretty quickly, but I did want to go over this very quickly. This is an excerpt from a short story by Isaac Asimov, a science fiction writer, and thought it was very appropriate for kind of what we're going through this year. It's called The Fun They Had, is this short story. And so I'll read it a little bit to you, and then we're going to look at some of the questions. By the way, reading to your children is a great way for them to understand fluency, which is a big part of literacy. How to pause correctly when you're reading a sentence, how to enunciate, how to use your voice in different ways so that people listening can get an understanding of what is going on, a better comprehension. And so reading to your children is another way that you can help develop their fluency, especially, which is basically their ability to read something properly and grasp it, be able to comprehend it. So let's read very quickly. Margie went into the schoolroom. It was right next to her bedroom, and the mechanical teacher was on, waiting for her. It was always on at the same time every day, except Saturday and Sunday, because her mother said little girls learned better if they learned at regular hours. The screen was lit up and it said, today's arithmetic lesson is on the addition of proper fractions. Please insert yesterday's homework in the proper slot. Margie put her homework in the slot with a sigh. She was thinking about the old schools they had when her grandfather's grandfather was a little boy. All the kids from the whole neighborhood came laughing and shouting into the schoolyard, sitting together in the same classroom, going home together at the end of the day. They learned the same things so they could help one another on the homework and talk about it. And the teachers were people. The mechanical teacher flashed on the screen. When we add the fractions 1/2 and 1/4, Margie was thinking about how the kids must have loved it in the old days. She was thinking about the fun they had. Obviously, in this little section, we're talking about distance learning, right? It's kind of ironic that this was written in 1968, and we're here reading about it now, and it kind of applies to what we're going through in 2021. But there's a few questions that can be asked about this passage. And if you're an educator, which I know we have a lot of educators in the meeting right now, we've seen all of this before. We know how this is done, but a lot of times we tend to forget. We tend to kind of breeze over it. But there's 4 different types of questions that you can ask about what your child is reading. And if they're reading something that interests them, or even if it's just something for school and they need a little bit of help with, sometimes you can help them as a parent getting that work done just by asking the right question. So let's take a look at some of these questions. First question says, who was the author of this story? And that's what we call a right there question, because you don't have to do any thinking. You just need to go back into the story and look for it because it's right there. And of course, here it is at the end, excerpted from The Fun They Had by Isaac Asimov. There is our author, and it's right there. So those questions are very simple, very basic. There are who, what, where, when, why, how questions. And if we go right back into the story, we can see the information that's there. We don't have to do any hard thinking, really. Next question is, what is Margie like about the old schools? This is what we call a pulling it together question. This is where the information is in the story, but it's not necessarily all in one place. It's kind of scattered throughout. And so you've got to take different pieces of information throughout the story and kind of pull it together to make a single answer. Other questions like this are, what are some similarities and differences in this story? We're talking about compare and contrast, pulling information from the story and putting it together in a way that makes sense. Third question, and you'll notice as we go on this list, questions are getting a little bit more difficult for the students. When does this story take place? You'll notice in the story, it never gave us in the setting, it never told us a time, a year that this actually happened. And so this is what we call a text and me question. And so what that is basically is a fancy way of saying inferencing question, where I'm taking information from the story, but I'm also taking information from my own life and my own mind and putting those two things together to form an opinion or to form a prediction. And inferencing questions, especially in the middle school years, which is what I teach, 7th grade, those are, I know on the STAR test, asked all the time. Most of the reading test is going to be about inferencing questions and how do we get students to make connections, not connections within text, but personal connections with the writing to where they can give a good prediction about what might happen next, or an inference, an educated guess about what is going on in the story. So if you asked a student today, when does this story take place? They're probably going to think that it was written pretty recently or about today, because that's what they're experiencing. That's their lived experiences. Oh, well, since 2020, since COVID, we've had to do distance learning, and it's pretty much the same thing. I wake up, I go turn on my computer in the next room, and I get started on my homework, and it's not the same as whenever we used to be all at school together and learning in the same classroom physically. And so that is an inferencing question. Those are very important, and it takes a little more thinking to generate those questions, to ask them. But once you do, you'll be surprised at how your children respond to them, because they've each got different experiences, and they may throw you a curveball and say something that you weren't expecting, but that actually you could see how it makes sense based on the information that they're bringing to the table. So those are very important questions as well. And finally, we have the last question, which was, should we have mechanical teachers? This is an on my own question. Has nothing to do with the story other than the fact that we're talking about mechanical teachers. But the story is not about whether we should or shouldn't have mechanical teachers. This is where the students are taking an idea from the story and forming their own opinion about it. We also do this in 7th grade, especially with writing. When we write our expository essays, they're going to have to explain their opinion and provide evidence, provide reasons to show or to explain what it is that they believe. So if students say, or if your children say, I don't think we should have mechanical teachers, I think it makes school boring. Well, they've just given you an opinion, and they've also given you a reason. They think it makes school boring and they're not able to learn as much. They've given you reasons for that, and they can develop those reasons even more when we have a conversation with it. And that goes back to the thing that we're talking about when we mention engaging with our students, with our children. It's not just one way. It goes both ways. It's a conversation. And so asking those questions in a conversational form, answering those questions for ourselves, giving our opinions and asking our children what they think about that, these are all just ways to engage them in conversation, which is going to improve their thinking skills, their comprehension. Even if it's just verbally, it's going to influence their fluency, all of which are important things to influence or to develop their literacy skills overall. And one thing that I don't want to pass over is we've been talking a lot about reading, but literacy also is important for writing. Writing plays a huge role in literacy. And so just like we're talking about, give your children an opportunity to read where it's going to be engaging for them. Give them an opportunity to write as well, whether that's, oh, I need help writing a grocery list. I'm going to be going to the grocery I'm going to H-E-B this weekend. Can you write me a list of the things we need? I'll dictate it to you. You can write it down for me. Even something as simple as that. Oh, it's your cousin's birthday coming up. I got a card. Why don't you write her out a nice message? Anything like that that encourages them to write, because I guarantee you, outside of the classroom, outside of school, they are not writing nearly as much as they should be. They do a lot of texting, and that's fine. We're going to talk about that when we talk about technology. That's fine to a point, but there's something about writing on paper. There's something about actually making the letters and forming them with pen or pencil that really helps us understand a little bit better our letters and the sounds that they make, our phonics, and that all plays, once again, a huge role in literacy. And so engaging in conversations, giving them opportunities to read, giving them opportunities to write. And we'll end with technology, talking about technology here. Kind of gonna have to rush through it, but technology is also a way that we can help our children develop their literacy skills. They're already on their phones all the time. We can make sure that we can provide them with some information or with some apps that can help them to read. I know that many of my students are all on this app called Wattpad, which, if you haven't heard about it, it's basically a open source program. It's free to join, and you get to join as either a reader or a writer or both. And what you can do is, once you join, you have access to every other person that is using that platform. Every other person that's using that has written stories, you can read their stories. You can give comments on their stories. It's kind of like the YouTube for creative writing. Now, I will say this comes with a disclaimer, because a bunch of us are going to go and download Wattpad right away. Because this is open source, because it's for pretty much everybody, anything goes. There's a lot of content, and I know a lot of parents have trouble with this program because there's a lot of content on there that is too mature for a 5th grader to be reading about. So I know that one thing that parents do, one way that they get around that, is that they'll set up an account for themselves. And there are controls, there are settings for parental controls. If you don't want your child being exposed to that mature content, things that are going to be a little too outside of their maturity level, then you can go ahead and block those. You can also enter tag words in the settings to where I want to block any story that is going to have this word, or that is described as having this sort of language. And so it does take a little extra work, but once you go through that process as a parent, the kids really get into it because they're reading, writing from people that are around their age. A lot of middle school, a lot of high school students use that program, Wattpad, Wattpad. They use that app to share their writing, share their creative writing. And so, like I said, it's probably the best way right now that teenagers and young adults can really get into writing and reading at the same time. However, I will say it with that disclaimer that as a parent, you probably want to create your own account and have them share it with you, but that you fix the settings to where it's blocking out all this stuff that you don't want them to be reading, because they accept all sorts of writing on that app. So, but I do recommend you take a look at it, because that is something that children, especially I know a lot of my middle school students really get into, especially with like the whole fan fiction thing, writing stories about their favorite K-pop artist and things like that. And so that's just one form of technology, but we've also got audiobooks, downloading some of those, and on the next road trip, listening to a book, listening to something that's going to be interesting, not just for you, but for your child as well. You know their interests better than anyone. You know what's going to get them motivated to read, what's going to get them motivated to write. And so downloading these books from audible.com, and there's multiple other outlets to get an audiobook onto your device, downloading those books and playing them during a road trip, or playing them during some of that found time. Oh, they're going out to mow the yard. Here, go listen to this audiobook while you're doing that. Or just listening to it yourself. That's one of the things that we didn't get to mention, kind of went over it very quickly, but modeling reading and writing in the home, actually sitting down, and instead of being on Facebook and looking at YouTube videos and things like that, setting aside a certain part of the day where you're like, I'm going to read for myself. I'm going to read a magazine. a newspaper. It doesn't have to be a huge, thick novel. I'm going to read something that is interesting to me, and I'm just going to have my kid watch me read. Or if I read something interesting that I think they're going to like, I'll read it out loud to them. I'll read them a couple of passages and see what they think. See if that gets their interest going into reading and writing. And so we can use technology creatively. There's plenty of other apps. I know that right now, as we're doing social distancing, libraries are looking for new ways to bring the library online to where students can log onto their computer, log into their account, and borrow a book, borrow an audio book, an e-reader book. There's plenty of different ways to use technology in a creative way to make sure that our kids have every opportunity to be engaged. Like we said from the beginning, engagement, 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 to be engaged with different forms of writing, to be engaged with different forms of reading. All right, and so just to review, for older children and adolescents, these can kind of go together. It's all about engagement, playing word games, discussing word meanings, asking questions, talking about what did they learn at school? Tell me, give me more details, elaborate in what you're telling me. Also offering a literacy-rich environment. You may not have a lot of books in the home, but take your kids to a bookstore, used bookstore or Barnes & Noble. Take them somewhere where they're gonna have an opportunity to just browse books. Even if they don't end up getting a book or reading a book, just looking at different book covers and finding out what they're interested in. I had a student, one of the things we do in our 7th grade class is we have a question of the day. And so once again, asking questions, it's a great way to get them thinking, great way to get them talking. And we have some pretty interesting discussions. One of our questions was, what was the best trip you've ever taken? Right? And this is a student, I had a student answer who you would not expect. He's not a really big reader. He's not into reading a lot, but he said the best trip he ever took was a school trip to Barnes & Noble. Now, part of that is probably because he didn't have to do schoolwork. He didn't have homework due that day. But when he was writing, because I have them write their answers out, he told me the best thing about that trip was I'm with my friends and we get to just look at different games that they have there, different books that they have there. And he spent pretty much the whole time there, a couple of hours, in 2 sections. He was really into sports. So he spent a lot of time in the sports section, looking at the different picture books, reading different stats about his favorite players. And he was also really into video games. And so they have a whole like comics/video games section in the store as well. And so he was reading books about that as well. And so he's getting to decide what he wants to read. And his level of engagement was really high because he actually got to choose to read things that were interesting to him. It wasn't assigned like it is in school. And it wasn't something that he was being forced to do. He actually got to choose what he wanted to read based on his own interest level. So, and this was a student that, like I said, you wouldn't expect that answer to come out of them, that their favorite trip was to a bookstore. But
1 minute, sir. Sorry.
all right, no, that's fine, sir. Thank you. But that was their favorite trip. And it was all about having meaningful engagement with the text. And so, like I said, let me stop my share here real quick. Like I said, it is all about engagement with the students, with the children, and getting them to do as much reading and writing as they can, but in a way that they're going to actually enjoy it, in a way that they have some choice to participate. So thank you, Mr. Cortez, for letting me know the time. Are there any questions? Very quickly, we had a lot of information to go through, so I'm sorry if you sped through it a little too quickly. And I know Ms. Garza is here in the meeting, and she's sending in the chat a bunch of links. She has a lot of information about technology, especially when it comes to library technology. So if you want to get with her, she's sending some information in the chat as well. But are there any questions before we close out real quick? I'll take that as a no then.
Mr. Trevino, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I sincerely appreciate it and enjoyed it. I think all our guests did. The next thing that I am going to do is I will share my screen. First of all, if I could, before I go on further, can I take a quick picture of who's there so that we can add that? I'd need, if people could turn on their cameras so I could take a quick picture, if that's okay. Thank you. it's not a must, but we appreciate that. First, I gotta get the camera, sorry. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you all very much. The next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna do the spin the wheel to see who our winner will be. Can you all see the wheel? Not yet, right? Can you all see the wheel now? Okay, and I'm gonna spin the wheel at this point. After I spin it, whoever wins, please, if you could stay at the end, I would need your phone number so that Ms. Prado can get back with you with the prize. Again, the prize that we will be giving will be a portable charger. And we will do this now. The wheel is spinning. Our winner is Ms. Bernice Morales. Congratulations, Ms. Morales. Let's take a quick picture. Fantastic. Please stay at the end. Are there any questions before we, I'm gonna stop sharing first. If I can. Okay, how do I stop sharing, sir? Oh, there it is up there. Yes, thank you. If there's no questions or anything, thank you all very much for participating. We sincerely appreciate everybody being here. Thank you very much. Ms. Morales, if you could please stay real quick. Hey, ma'am,
Hi,
how you doing?
doing good.
Good to see you. Let me write
Good to
down your
see you
name
as
real
well.
quick. And your quick number, ma'am?
793
793
4444.
4444. Well, that's easy.
Yep.
956, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It's good seeing you.
Thank you. What did I win?
Oh, I'm sorry. You won the portable charger.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I don't know how to close this.